Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Essential Libertarians, giving you the tools for self-governance. Today, I have an amazing candidate for the New Mexico State House, Andrew Kennedy. Andrew, how are you doing today?
Oh, it's another day in paradise, and thank you for having me on.
Yeah, I know. I keep seeing pictures from your ranch, and I'm like, wow, this guy really is having a great time.
Yeah, I'm always having a great time, and like you mentioned, I'm a candidate for State House District 66 as a Libertarian. I'm only running against a Republican, and I'm winning over a lot of support from the voters, even though we live in one of the reddest counties in America. I'm also on the Central Valley Soil and Water Conservation Board out here, which I got elected to last year, and I defeated a 20-year incumbent that was supported by the GOP as well. So
Nice. Yeah. And what's nice to see is that's actually coming around. Where a lot of people before is like, I'm either voting blue or red, and that was the only thing. Now they're more open to ideas. And I would say that's mainly because the government is messed up in every conceivable area. And they always did that, but now it's just more apparent. So to
right.
get started with all of this, I'm really, really excited with what you're doing. One thing I was going to ask though is you kind of had the idea I'm going to stick to my ranch and do my own thing. Now you actually are going out there and getting it done. What kind of made the shift from, hey, I'm just going to take care of my animals and my property to now I actually am going to make a change in New Mexico?
Yeah, that was kind of the idea that I had for a while, and you know, it's a good idea on paper until you realize that they're basically never going to leave you alone, and nobody else is really going to go out there and make the changes that you want to see in your daily life other than you and other libertarians. So even though I'm as young as I mean I'm only 24, I stepped up to the plate and said, hey, I'm going to go try to make these changes, starting with the Soil and Water Board, and try to prove to the constituents around here, hey, my ideas actually work. um like I said, just kind of prove myself and show that both my ideas and libertarian ideas work to help improve our lives. In which, I mean, a perfect example of that is the entire rest of the board out here is all Republican, but they were still sitting around and kowtowing to the COVID mandates that the state government still had in for government boards, and they weren't allowing public access to the meetings. And it actually took me to introduce a measure to open the meetings back up to public attendance where people could come in and see, hey, this is what this board's actually doing with our money, because part of the property tax goes to funding this board and the activities that it does.
Yeah, and I think one funny thing is that Republicans will always act that they're, against Democrats, and some of them are to some capacity, which is good. But then some of them just kowtow and do the establishment thing. I think when push comes to shove, that is the majority of the GOP in that party, and it's nice to see that during this whole like scary beer flu time is what I call it, or this regime, that you were actually able to stand up and tell them, hey, look, freedom is the most important thing, because without it, you don't really have the ability to do anything. You don't have the ability to have meetings. You don't have the ability to figure out what's going on. You don't even have the ability to sit down and talk to people, which is why they wanted to do it, get you alone, get you afraid. So that's a great start to say that, hey, and even that's something I wish the National Front did and the Libertarians is hammer down. These lockdowns were immoral, they were wrong, and we're never, ever going to do this again. Now,
Right.
to me, the only way to never, ever do that again is to decrease the size and scope of government. It's not a matter of trying to put this person in place or put this party over this party. It's just decentralization. Otherwise,
Right.
you end up, as I would say, rearranging chairs on the Titanic.
Yeah, I agree.
Nice, nice. So let's get into some issues. So I'm curious. I always ask like the big candidate question: what are your three top issues, and what are you doing to kind of get those either in fruition or get awareness about them?
So my three big issues, the top two are gonna kind of be cliche libertarian ones. First one is I'm pro gun, and even though I'm running against a Republican, I am billing myself as the only pro gun candidate in the race. Even though my opponent actually owns a gun store, my policies are still more pro gun than his are, because one of the things that I go out and I talk about is one of the first things I'd like to see and I'd like to work on if I win this election is trying to repeal a lot of the gun control legislation that was passed in 2018 and 2019 after Governor Grisham was elected. There are several of them, but the two biggest ones are it was basically a red flag law that was passed here in New Mexico, and also a law that could potentially punish people if your firearm is stolen from you and then used in the commission of a crime. You could potentially be held partially liable for that. And we all know
That's
that
crazy.
yeah, like we all know that both of those things are going to affect people who cannot defend themselves as well in court, either because they don't know the laws as well or they don't have the financial capacity to actually fight the state on those. Those are the people who are going to be affected the most by them. If there's some bureaucrat in Santa Fe that just happens to own a couple of shotguns that they take out, shooting clays, and they have some sort of issue with those laws, they have the money and they have the connections to fight that, but the common person out here really doesn't. Plus, too, you don't even have the time to make the court appearances and everything to do that if they start abusing that and start with overzealous prosecution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of a barrier to entry. It's like most people don't know when a cop stops you and says, "Can I search you?" You have the right to say no, and they don't. Yes. Most people don't know that. Most people can't name even. They say they love the First Amendment. I'm like, all right, name 4 things you can do, like redress of grievances, freedom of press, stuff like that. I think is important to know. Now you're well versed in that, and I think that's great. I think it's kind of crazy, the one thing you told me, that someone can steal a firearm that you registered legally, use it, and then you're liable. It actually makes people not want to register stuff, which, even though you said your opponent has a gun store, I'm probably willing to bet he's for A, background checks, B, he might be for red flag laws, I don't know, and C, he probably thinks felons shouldn't have guns, which to me, if I'm going to talk about like issues, I don't want to just say, oh yeah, we should have, something small, like, oh, we should take away these small. No, should felons own guns? And I think, that's a clear yes. What do you think about those things? Background checks, all that stuff.
Right. Yeah. And one thing, like my opponent, he really hasn't put out anything on guns aside from your stereotypical NRA talking points.
Yeah.
In which, basically, oh, yeah, you should be able to own a hunting rifle. It's like, no, I think if you want to, and I've even said this to him when I was talking to him in his store one day, I told him, I said, I think you should be able to own a tank without any paperwork if that's what you want to own. As long as you don't hurt anybody with it, why is it anybody else's business?
Yeah. Actually, people would say that, and they're like, oh, my God, you want to own. And I'm not an M1 Abrams, operator or anything. But A, the barrier to that is super high, not because of the state, but because A, it's going to cost a lot. You need a place to put it. And if you have a place to put it, you need to know how to operate it. It's not like you can go on YouTube or TikTok, although that'd be hilarious to see. I bought my M1 Abrams. How do I actually, there's no instruction manual here. What do I do? And to my knowledge, you need like a couple of people to operate a tank and get it loaded. It's not just, I think people are just thinking, oh, I'll just drive up in my driveway or drive up in my ranch and pull it up. It's not. So it's going to be a select few people who can do those anyway. But if you want to own that, if you want to own a Black Hawk, if you want to own, just I'm thinking of like crazy things right now, like a Javelin or anything, you should be allowed to have that. People forget the reason that America exists is because civilians, regular people, Minutemen, I should say, were able to own military grade weapons. Whether or not you consider military grade better than civilian, I think is a good thing. But it's always funny to me. People say they want to ban assault rifles. I say, okay, what's an assault rifle? They're like, well, it's a gun that looks scary. And I think the Republicans are a little bit better on guns, but still they don't have the they're like, yeah, let's do background checks. Yeah, felons can't have them. Oh, okay. So, and I see a surprising amount of Republicans, almost all of them that I can think of, that are pro red flag laws. And that is the worst thing ever.
Yeah. And when I was a kid, because I grew up in rural areas in Texas, I grew up hunting and shooting. I mean, I harvested my first deer with a rifle when I was 4. So,
Impressive.
it's been something I've been around my entire life. And, I was always taught, oh, yeah, Republicans don't want to take our guns. But then I'm sitting back here and watching, well, these Republicans are kind of sitting back in, if they're not actively helping pass these red flag laws, they're not putting up any resistance to them. They're kind of treating them as, well, if we let the Democrats do this, then they're not going to come after more. But we always know they're going to come after more. It's going to happen. It's how the anti-gun lobby works. I mean, my overall stance of what I would love to see happen here in New Mexico is that within our state, we fully nullify all federal gun laws, such as if a firearm, no matter what it is, if it's a full auto, SBS, SBR, whatever, if it's manufactured here in New Mexico, sold to a New Mexico resident, and it stays in New Mexico, the federal government should have no business in that. There should be no federal paperwork on it. There should be no federal background checks. That should just be our business.
Yeah.
In which that's, if you want to take what a lot of people want to play off of, I mean, I don't personally think the Constitution is a perfect document by any means, because it allowed this massive, bloated, out of control government we have. But that is what it says. If there is commerce going on within a state's boundaries, it's none of the federal government's business. And in my opinion, that should fall under that commerce clause.
Yeah. I think the federal government honestly has become, like Hobbes would say, a Leviathan, and it's just completely out of control. So I think your solution, which I just call a Second Amendment sanctuary, is a great idea. And definitely when I broadcast this out to people, this is something I think they need to take seriously, because the only way to defend against the tyrannical government, in my opinion, is to be well equipped. The other amendments are okay. The First Amendment's okay, but let's be honest. If you don't have the second, they can do, and they will do, whatever they want. We've seen that in Cambodia. We've seen that in Uganda. And we've seen that many of times in all these different regimes. So hats off to you, literally. I like your hat for doing that. What are the other two big issues?
So my second one is, being anti-tax. And although we do have a income tax here in New Mexico, it's not all that high in the grand scheme of things. In my opinion, the first tax that I'd like to set my sights on and get rid of is called a gross receipts tax. Now, if people listening to this don't know what a gross receipts tax is, you can kind of think of it as a sales tax, except it's paid at every level of production throughout the line. So, like with a standard sales tax, basically the only end consumer pays that sales tax. So, under a sales tax system, when you go to the grocery store, you pay the sales tax on the groceries, but under a gross receipts tax, the grocery store pays the sales tax when they buy the produce from a producer. And then also you go back to that producer, they're having to pay a sales tax on fertilizer, seed, diesel, everything like that. Mm-hmm. Because in states where you don't have a gross receipts tax, if you're doing production in the ag business, you can get agribusiness write-offs and not have to pay sales taxes if you can prove that it's going into the production and you're a wholesale producer and you're not an end retailer. And surprisingly, one industry that this affects the most in our state particularly is the healthcare industry. And when you're coming out of a situation where you've had, at least with a government declared pandemic, and you have a tax that in the past few years has been running off healthcare professionals, and then you're in a panic because you think you don't have enough healthcare professionals in your state to take care of it, and then you need to issue lockdowns and mandates to help alleviate pressure on the healthcare professionals you have left. Well, all you've done is you've just shot yourself in the foot for the past 10, 15 years. So, we don't need to be running off any business from our state. But, when it's affecting a business that is important as the healthcare industry, even in times, just normal times, that's an industry that we should not be trying to antagonize. Mm-hmm. And that is one thing that I've been asked by several people and several different endorsement groups out here. Well, what tax would you like to replace the gross receipts tax with? I've straight up said none. I wouldn't replace it with any tax. I would just cut the gross receipts tax, and then I would cut the budget.
Yeah, that's the best way to do it, because I think what people forget to understand is, in the absence of trying to tax people more income so that they can redirect that to things like charity. They can redirect that to other facilities or institutions that will help individuals, as opposed to just saying, well, the state has to do it. And I'm sure they're corrupt in what they're doing with the gross receipts tax. I'm sure that's not all going to benevolent things, because if you have a monopoly on collecting taxes, let's face it, you're going to use that in some bad way, or you're going to be inefficient with it, even if you have good intentions. And that's just how it is. Since we're on the subject of taxes, can I ask, I haven't researched, does New Mexico have a property tax?
New Mexico does have a property tax, although it's not very high. For example, on my place, I only pay $50 in property tax a year.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's not nearly as high as a lot of states. Basically, what New Mexico does is it just has a bunch of smaller taxes all spread out all throughout everything. So not one particular thing hits anybody real hard. They just collect their stuff. Your income basically dies by a death by 1,000 cuts out here, pretty much.
Yeah, so it sounds like, oh, hey, the property tax wasn't too bad. Oh, hey, there's the breathing tax. Oh, hey, there's the I waved at the mailman tax. Okay, that's 100. And then all of a sudden, just this tax, that tax, I watched Netflix tax. Okay, I'm up to like $500, and I'm just making up crazy names for them. I think that's kind of a sneaky way of doing it, where here in Pennsylvania, they just hit you with the property tax. And, all right, fine, I'm paying $1,000 or something.
Yeah, and then another thing that what they do is they allow localities to set their own property taxes and their own sales tax rates. So you have a state property tax and a state sales tax and the state income tax, and then you have the state gross receipts tax that everybody pays. But then, it just depends on because I don't live inside of any city limits anywhere. So if I buy something out here in the little village that I live in, I don't really pay hardly any sales tax. And on my property, I don't pay hardly any property tax. But if you live in town, you're going to get, depending on what town you live in, you're going to get waylaid with property tax or a sales tax from that locality.
I see. And I would actually figure, even though the individual taxes by themselves, like, okay, fine, you get 50 here, you get 20 here. People say, what's the big deal? But I imagine when those add up, that can limit something you have. Like maybe, just maybe, with inflation getting so crazy and you have a bad month, whether you're living in the city or you're out in the country or you're a rancher or whatever, I can imagine some people not being able to make those payments now, especially with inflation. And inflation's not going to get any better because both parties have the Keynesian mindset of let's just print money at the federal level, which is ultimately going to make it more difficult at the state and local level because people say, hey, I can't make the payments on these 100 set of taxes. So, yeah, definitely, whatever you can, go after every single tax. Like people just say, oh, Kareem, sales tax isn't a big deal. To me, it is, because that way you're still taking money off of something that I already paid taxes on. Why am I paying taxes on income tax and then sales tax? It just,
right.
Like you're saying, a death by 1,000 cuts, a death by 1,000 taxes is the issue. And ultimately, to me, if you disincentivize people by taxing the heck out of them, you'll disincentivize them to work. Ultimately, you're hurting your own economy. So
right. Yeah. And one thing that I have tried to do from the Soil and Water Conservation Board is our tax that is levied out in the property tax from that board, it makes up, if you live in the rural parts of the county, it makes up about 2.5% to 3% of your total property taxes. I don't know the figures off the top of my head of what it takes up if you live inside of city limits, because there's a couple of different localities within the district boundaries, and I'd have to look up what their tax rates are across the board to tell you that percentage. But, what I've tried to do is I've tried to lower our property tax that we take out, at least some. I'd prefer to cut it to nothing.
That would work.
But the Republicans on the board didn't even listen to me when I tried to introduce a motion on it. They didn't even acknowledge the motion. But one of the reasons why, that I was trying to justify on cutting the taxes is we have over $300,000 in surplus funds for the board.
Mm-hmm.
And we come nowhere near close to spending anything like that a year. I ran the numbers. I think that at the current spending rate that they've been spending stuff on for the past couple of years, that amount of money in the bank if no further income was collected by the board that would sustain their spending rate for the next 8.5 years. So, I mean, there would be nothing wrong with lowering the tax rate that we collect, even though, yeah, it might only cut off $5-10 from people's taxes a year. Why not put that $5-10 in people's pocket again?
Yeah, that is my idea. Well, ultimately, taxation comes down to one simple principle. Do I have the right to do this? If I don't have the right to say, Andrew, I'm taking $5 from you because I want to do it for whatever charity, this, myself, then I don't have the right to tell my friends to do it. Ultimately, then you start asking, okay, how did I give the right to somebody who I elected to do it? And that's, I think, part of the problem is we give elected representatives the right to do things that we are not allowed to do. And
Right.
and a lot of people would say, well, you can tax me, but don't put mandates on me. It's coming from the same principle. If I don't have the right to shut down your ranch or your business, then somebody else does not have the right to do that. And also that goes for elected officials. That's the same thing to me for tax. You can't, the agent cannot have more power than the principal. And that's ultimately why it's wrong. And I think people will be shocked to see that how much voluntary work and, charities and whatever else exists in New Mexico that would actually come together and make things work and work even better. Do you think most things could be done on a voluntary basis if you got rid of a lot of these grosser taxes and these little taxes everywhere?
Oh, for sure. I mean, especially once you add up all of your federal taxes and you add up your state taxes. I mean, just throwing a dart at the wall here, I would think that most people's income, by the time you add everything up, you're getting 40 to 50% of your income taken off by the time everything's said and done. And most people would go out and, whether they'd go donate to their local food bank or different charity, whatever it may be, a lot more good could be done in the local communities with that 40 to 50% of income if people were free to donate it. And like I said, I guarantee you, if people were able to keep, basically double the amount of spending money that they currently have, we would see a lot more charity activities going on, no matter what they might be.
Yeah, which is what I want to see, because I'm always happy to see when a church or when people are saying, hey, we're going to put out some stuff for the food bank, like you were saying, or even just helping somebody out in your own means in your own time. That to me is the real essence of what it means to help other Americans out, not using a central institution and corrupt bureaucrats who may have never even met you to redistribute wealth in a way that's inefficient.
Right. I'd rather take, say $15 and somebody who's down on their luck, take and buy them a meal in their hard times rather than have that $15 taken from me and have some bureaucrat take $5 off of that 15 for their own paycheck. And then, another 2.5 or $3 for processing fees. And then by the time they're done with it, oh yeah, we're going to take, $3 and give it in the welfare and give it in a welfare fund.
Yeah. And by that time, courtesy of the federal government, printer go burr at the Fed has made it down to $1 because of due to inflation.
Right.
So, I think one way to start averting actually a lot of these taxes is, I'll just throw a little bit of a curveball, is cryptocurrency as well, because you have it, like I have some on my phone, I have some in my wallet, and I send it back and forth. Someone needs something, just boom, 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 really quick. And I think that's a way to avert it. Also, we have gold and silver, so I think that might be a good idea, just to encourage people, hey, if we can't go directly back on the gold standard, to at least encourage some commodities and some things to be traded in gold and silver. And that way you also get past the tax man and also trading service for service.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, definitely trading service for service. That's always an option. And like you said, gold and silver for sure. I mean, I am not the guy to go to for crypto. I don't know hardly anything about that. So that's kind of out of my ballpark. But I mean, if it works, hey, go for it.
Yeah. To me, any currency that works is one that's decentralized, that the feds are not going to be able to touch, or they don't know about, or you and whoever you're transacting with can go ahead and do business and say, here's what I want. Here's what you can offer. And if we can mutually benefit, as Milton Friedman would say, the nice thing about free markets is both parties have to benefit or at least get what they want. That's, to me, the essence of it. So maybe New Mexico will actually show the world, because of what you're doing, that excessive taxation not only doesn't work, but look at this amazing society with either very little taxes, or if we're lucky, maybe you're able to knock off everything and just make it completely on the basis of charitable donations, voluntary interaction, and to me, what I would call a real civil society.
Yeah, I mean, if I had to offer it as an option, because I mean, New Mexico is unfortunately a heavily blue state, and it's due to how everything is districted, and I can go into that later on. I do have an idea on a proposal that could fix that. I know it probably wouldn't pass because it would put a lot of the legislators out of the legislature. But, I'd be willing to offer it to them, hey, why don't we just set up a GoFundMe account for the state government? And if people like what the state government's been doing, they can donate to it.
That's what I've said. I've said, look, if you think the federal government or you think the state government has the best programs and that's what you think, then allow people to opt out. I guarantee you, if they're like, yeah, you can get out of Social Security, I would get off. Heck, I'd get off this podcast, drive down, like, where do I sign up? Give me all my Social Security back. I do. That was actually one thing, even with all the crazy things Jorgensen said, and there are things I liked and didn't. I'm like, oh, I can opt out of Social Security. That's a big thing to actually help me. Yes, I would say I was a big proponent of ending the war in Yemen and auditing the Fed, which will help. But some things that just services that if you think they're good and people say, okay, I want to do this or not, give them the option to opt out. It's always that meme I come back to. Statism idea is so good that they have to be mandatory.
Right.
I would love to see you win, get in there and just knock all these taxes out. I'm sure there'll be the question, which you've heard, I'm not going to, who will build the roads, because we can't figure that out in a free market. It's too tough.
Right. We have, I know that the market has shrunk a lot for car manufacturers, but we know, we have basically a half dozen different companies here in the U.S. that make the common vehicles that go down the roads, which are not even arguably, are demonstrably a much more complicated piece of technology than a flat thing. These private companies can make them, but the only way that we can make a road is if we have money stolen from us. Yes. Doesn't make any sense.
You have to use violent coercion to fund infrastructure, which is interesting because people will say, not only do you have to do that, but that's the price of living in a civilized society. And I'm thinking, wait, using violence to fund infrastructure is civilized? That almost sounds to me like, just the ancient conquerors, pick your favorite one, Genghis Khan, Tiladon. It's basically the same concept, except you have to fill out a form and figure out exactly what you owe. So maybe in some ways it's even crazier.
And my favorite thing always is the roads are always brought up as one of the first arguments against the repealing of taxes. But the thing is the vast majority of taxes never go to infrastructure projects. I don't care what infrastructure project you want to pick. It can be roads, it can be water pipelines, natural gas pipelines, electric lines, whatever. The vast majority of taxes never even remotely go near those. And that has been one thing that I have pushed with the voters around here, because our highways are terrible. It's like, I tell people, it's like, look, I prefer to not get taxed at all. But if we are going to get taxed and they're going to tell us, hey, we're taking your money so that we can provide you with infrastructure, okay, at least provide us with infrastructure if you're going to take the money for the infrastructure.
Yeah.
Because like after the current governor was elected, right before the current governor was elected, New Mexico had a surplus in the budget. And within a few months, I don't know the number of, or the time frame right off the top of my head, but it wasn't very long. That surplus in the budget was gone. And I know one of the things that a lot of people were very mad about was millions of dollars were spent on painting murals on the sides of overpasses on the highways in the Albuquerque and Santa Fe metro areas. And, we've had highways down here that have had potholes big enough you could knock the bottom end of a 1-ton truck out from underneath the truck on. So, you know,
They painted with gold. All right, here's actual gold we melted down. How do you spend millions of dollars to paint a mural? If you
yeah,
spend,
it's like if you're gonna say, well, it's for the roads, it's like, okay, well, actually fix the roads and like at least before you paint murals on the side of the roads, okay? Like priorities here.
that's typical government stuff, though. Like you see it all the time. Like,
Yeah, and especially like that. That's archetypical of Democrats in particular. Of it's a performative thing of, oh, we're making everything nice and pretty, but we're not actually doing anything to help you.
mhm. Yeah, no, that's definitely prominent among the Democrat Party and
Oh yeah,
as well as the Republican Party. We can see that now at every level. Not only the murals, but what they're doing in the U.S. is ridiculous to me. It's like, here's 50 billion for Ukraine. Oh, we want to rebuild after Hurricane Ian and fix the water in Mississippi. Man, I don't have any money for that. So that's principally why, on a federal level, on a state level, and a local level, I just don't find taxes or, redistributing any type of wealth, even if it is at a small level, to be effective. And I'm really excited to see what you can accomplish and how much taxes you can knock off. So definitely keep me posted on that one. So, what is your big number three? We got guns, taxes, and
so number three is natural resources and conservation,
ooh,
because New Mexico is a state. And I know this is kind of one that's not very common for libertarians. Um, New Mexico is a state that the vast majority of our economy is based off of some sort of natural resource. Um, at the last fiscal reports I saw, the biggest economic driver in this state was the oil and natural gas industry, and second was agriculture, particularly cattle ranching.
nice.
And the state does not manage those resources well at all. They actually within the last couple of years they put in it's effectively a ban on drilling on state-owned land. In which, one thing about New Mexico, 68% of the land mass of this state is owned by some sort of government entity,
Mm-hmm.
and that's spread across the state land office, the Bureau of Land Management, and the Forestry Service, the natural parks, or the national parks, and the military bases.
Okay. Well, I got a lot. I got a lot of questions, a lot of things to say about that, especially the oil and gas, because I just actually got in, some back and forth with people. I said, why are we depending? What president doesn't matter, but why are we depending on the Saudis for oil when we have oil here? Gas does not need to be this expensive, and I think that's what's hurting people the most. Like if they say, "Okay, I'm good with my guns," no one's going. Okay, I'll pay the 50 million taxes, whatever. I made enough money out here. But then I'm sure they're seeing the gas prices, and that's even, getting on there. Like that's annoying everybody, including me,
Right.
because it drives food up. Could
Right.
you, oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Could you feasibly introduce legislation, which is what I want to do eventually, maybe to start actually using, drilling some oil and gas to bring these prices down, to stop depending on foreign oil, and to ultimately bring back the economy of what America used to be?
There is some legislation that could be introduced at the state legislature to help alleviate that. There's a bigger problem within the entire oil trade itself that I can go into here in a minute. So most of the oil that is produced here in the U.S. goes to actual fuels, whether that's jet fuels, gasolines, diesel, etc. Most of the fuel that the OPEC production countries make that we buy actually goes to making lower grade petroleum products, such as plastics, fertilizers, that sort of thing, that we need just a little bit of their crude to supplement the byproducts from our crude to produce. So if you actually know how the oil trade works, or the oil trading industry works, because I've worked in the oil field since I was 19.
Oh, wow.
If you know how everything works, and you sit there and you watch, they say, well, OPEC cut back their production 2% and it's going to raise gas prices. It's like, well, that makes no sense. It would make sense if plastic products went up in price, but it doesn't make sense for fuel to go up in price because the actual supply for those fuels is not decreasing.
Mm-hmm. So just simply put, because you have a lot more expertise than I do, and that is something probably I wouldn't even know about OPEC, because I know like the basics. And I've known friends who work on oil fields as well, and they've told me similar stuff. But as far as I'm concerned, food does not need to be this expensive, and gas does not need to be this expensive. And if we could just tell the feds, like, God bless California, they said to the feds, we're not following your immigration laws. Great. Texas doesn't follow their gun laws. Good. Same with Alaska. Is it about time, whether you're running for local, state, or whatever, to tell the feds, hey, this is my state. These are my resources, or our resources, even though it's at a collective level. We're going to go ahead. We're going to drill. It's none of your business. I don't care about your environmental friends. I don't care about the quote unquote people who scream green and this and use lithium batteries, which destroy a whole mountain. I don't care about these wind and solar people, even though I think I saw somebody, I see people advocating for wind and solar all the time. We're going to drill. We're going to use fossil fuels, and we're going to use nuclear energy. What do you think about those two?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that oil and nuclear are the two ways to go. They're both the two cleanest options that we currently have right now that are actually feasible energy production outlets. Because let's be honest, a wind turbine or a solar farm, it doesn't matter how many of them you put up. Actually, the more of them you put up, the worse off you are, because they can't pay back the amount of energy and carbon that it took to produce them. So, it's a nice idea, but the technology needs to be refined before it's implemented more in force. So
Yeah.
like I said, I'm not against solar or wind. It's just, we don't need to be dumping tons of taxpayer funds into it to put up all of these solar farms and all these wind farms when they're not going to pay off. Once the technology is there, if you want to make the argument for it, I guess then you have a leg to stand on. But right now, there's not a leg to stand on. There's not even a table in the room. But
there's not to stand on either, I guess.
Right. There's not a table. There's not a leg on the. There's not a leg on the table. There's not a leg on the chair. There's not even a chair or a table in the room at all. But there are like you said, there are things that we could do at the local and the state level to try to tell the feds, hey, you're harming us by not letting us produce our own energy. And when it comes to the Bureau of Land Management land and the Forestry Service lands and everything like that, there's not much a state legislature can do to try to force their hand to allow either, responsible logging there or responsible oil production there. But when it comes to like our state lands, we definitely, it's not out of the question at all to try to introduce legislative action to open up those lands to responsible energy production, because there's absolutely no reason like why there shouldn't be responsible usage of these lands. I mean, there's even people that come out here and try to say that we shouldn't even be grazing cattle on this land. I mean, the bison herds used to roam out here, hundreds of years ago, just completely unchecked. And it's like, you have a problem with there being one cow to every 300 acres out here? I mean, come on now.
Oh my God. Hopefully these aren't the cow farts people. Oh my God, cow farts are destroying the environment. Some of these environmental claims just need to be, or this crazy environmental science, climate change science needs to be knocked down. Whether it's by just regular people on podcasts or yourself, once you get in a position more people are listening to you, just say, hey, this is the real facts. This is the facts about maintaining cattle and actually it's not hurting the planet. To me, it's helping the planet. And one big thing I think is the federal government doesn't want people to use their own energy because of control. Because if energy actually is the biggest thing, it's not necessarily Federal Reserve notes, because you could come up with a different currency. But if you don't have energy, you're kind of at a standstill. If you can control energy, you essentially control people and their movement. So I think it's the biggest thing. Could even be more so even the guns. To really get your independence is just to get energy independent. Just tell the feds, no, this is how we're doing it. And if you have a problem with it, tough luck. We're our own state. And I don't see Republicans doing that. So the Libertarian Party is the last hope.
Yeah, like you said, with energy, you control everything, and it doesn't matter what the energy of the mode of transportation is, whether you're going all the way back to days of horse and wagons, or you're talking about now with um, gasoline and diesel powered vehicles, or even if the Ford Nucleon had taken off and you had nuclear powered vehicles everywhere, whatever that energy source is, if you can control it, then you can control everything that somebody does, because like you said, you can control their movement and you can also control their food supply.
Yes, literally, energy controls everything. Even if you have all of the resources and everything, if you take away energy, that's the hard part. Like, even when this stuff was going on, they're like, there'll be food shortages. I went out, did some, I'm not a great farmer or anything or a gardener, but I got some tomatoes growing. I got some green peppers. I figured out some things with water filtration, working on getting a garden. Then maybe eventually, once I get to city council, knock off their crazy things and get some chickens. I can
Yeah,
deal
there.
with that. I can deal with a currency issue. Hopefully, I can do my crypto. We could do gold. We can figure that out. Energy, I'm like, okay, I can get a generator for a while, but
Right.
what do you do? So energy is, I think, one of the biggest things, and that's the one they're hitting the most. It's kind of scary now that people in Europe gave up their fossil fuels because they wanted to, I guess, kowtow to environmental ideas or kind of virtue signal. And now when winter hits and they don't have that Nord Stream pipeline, a lot of people could freeze. So I don't think people think about how big of an issue energy is. Without energy, we can't have this conversation right now. And
Exactly.
whoever watching cannot watch that. And
Yeah, and one thing about the current federal administration, what they've been doing is they have been doing some stuff through the Department of Energy to try to put more regulations on energy production and whatnot. But they're also using other offices to do the same thing that you wouldn't normally think about. Like out here, we were in a meeting the other day on the conservation board, and we had a USDA employee, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, come in and talk about, well, the federal government might come in here into our area and start implementing. I'd have to look at the agenda papers. I've got a whole stack of them on my desk here, but there's about 70 or 80 of them for each meeting, and I had to find the exact paper of what exactly they named it. But essentially, they're possibly going to have the USDA office out here involved with trying to implement new emissions regulations. And they weren't really specific on if it was going to be oil and gas only or if it was going to be agriculture only, but they hinted at it being possibly both. And I'm just sitting, I was just sitting there, and I asked this USDA employee, I was like, okay, how does this have anything to do with agriculture, and how does it make, farmers and ranchers' lives easier? Because that's supposed to be what the USDA is all about. And typical, run around blank response of, an answer without an answer, pretty
we're
much.
here to help you. We're here for your safety, but we're here to, that's what I always hear. Oh, we're here to help. We're here to, if we weren't around, this would happen, that would happen. And yeah, I've become so desensitized to that.
Yeah, and the thing that it really gets you is, you have all these government agencies that come out here and say stuff like that, and then once you actually get in, get elected and get involved, and you can see, okay, well, here's the spending line for how much money is going to this program, and it's basically not reaching any taxpayers at all. It's just being shuffled around through a bunch of bureaucrats, and they're collecting a paycheck off of it, and then nothing's being done with it aside from basically justifying somebody having a job. It's like,
That's government in a nutshell.
yeah, like you and I know that already, and a lot of people already have an idea of it. But like you actually get to see a full scale scope of it. It's like, wow, it's even worse than I thought it was.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. People like Fauci this. And I say, yeah, that's the typical definition. You have a bureaucrat, probably doesn't even work in the field, or, if they did, it's been years. They don't have knowledge of what's going on, yet they're collecting a paycheck. I guess what people don't really realize, or maybe they do, is that there's hundreds of those bureaucrats there. Just someone saying, I'm going to set rules. Probably has never worked in any of these industries, probably doesn't know much about the energy industry at all, oil and gas. And they want to make rules for everything. And that's, to me, the craziest thing. That even happens in the free market, and that's something that gets mad. I've had managers who literally, I'm like the head of IT, and they're sitting there with like a tablet, and they're trying to like hit it like this. I'm like, no, here's how I do it. So that's also a human problem, but it's more amplified when you have a monopoly.
Yeah, it's like when it comes to the USDA, I haven't met anybody at the USDA, whether you're talking about the secretary, the entire department, all the way down to the lowest lackey who's the enforcer for their stuff. I haven't met one of them yet. Now, I haven't met all of them, obviously, but I haven't met one yet that had any agriculture experience beyond, well, I took some FFA classes when I was in high school, and I have a garden and 3 chickens in my backyard. So, well, you've never done you haven't even done small scale agriculture production, let alone actual large scale agriculture production. So it's like, what makes you qualified to set regulations on this industry to actually make it work both for the producers and the consumers? Like you're just a consumer in this industry. Like how are you knowledgeable enough to help the producers here?
And they're not, which I think
exactly.
But because they have that government document, and a lot of people get tripped up on this. And that's one issue I think people still need to get over is like, there's an expert. Oh, I went to Harvard. I went to this, or I've done this. Or these guys, funny enough, I don't even know if they have any qualifications. But, oh, I'm in this bureaucratic position or in this position, and suddenly I'm an expert. And if people challenge that more, not just in the medical industry, but in every industry, like I'd love to see more people other than people in our libertarian sphere challenge Krugman and the financial stuff, and you challenging people who are these bureaucrats saying, oh, yeah, I know all about this stuff. I'm from the New Mexico Department of this or USDA or whatever it is. And then they have no qualification. They're basically doing what I'm doing. I'm not in any way a farmer or a rancher, and I think you'd find it ridiculous. You see like 3 or 4 plants out here and some chickens. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to tell you what to do, Andrew, because I know so much.
Yeah. It's more of a case of, well, yeah, that's great that you have an animal science or a horticulture degree from a East Coast university, but like, what do you actually know about raising cattle in the Western U.S.? Whether we're talking about New Mexico or we're talking about Wyoming or Montana. It's like, just because, you sat through a whole bunch of books, like, you don't have any actual experience. What do you actually know about this industry on the ground?
Yeah, that's a big thing. I would say the answer is they don't. They really don't. And that government's filled with people, even more so. The private sector has that problem too. I'm not one to say like, oh, once you get to the private sector, it's magic. It's all, Wonderland stuff and everything works. But at least the private sector, if someone's in a position where they don't know something, it becomes readily apparent. You can call them out and you can at least find some way to handle that. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But
yeah, I don't know how many times in the private sector, especially when it comes to petroleum, how many times you run across a new fresh engineer that's fresh out of college, and you run across the problem of, well, our books in college told us that this would work, with this particular well or whatever you're working on, and the guys that have been in the field for 10, 15, 20 years can sit there and tell them, I've seen this problem before. It's not going to work the way that your books say it's going to work. Won't work. But then it's, oh no, the books say it's going to work. I'm college educated and I know how it's going to work. It's like, all right, dude, you're going to take the fall for it, not me.
Yeah, I mean, and it's interesting to see like stuff like that happening over and over and over. It's just like nobody really coaches people. And it happened to me. I came out with my degree in computer science. I'm like, oh, I know how to do this. I use Microsoft Access. They're like, dude, that's 5 years old. Here's what we're using. It's kind of funny. It's like, hey, did they not coach you? I'm like, oh, I got this degree. Thank God I didn't have to take tons and tons of loans out for it. It got that paid off. But the big issue is they don't know what they're doing. And I think I even saw that with your opponent, with Jimmy Mason, I believe his name was. They didn't tell on the tax code. And it was funny. It was kind of funny to see that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, where he came out and said that, he said that he was in support of the gross receipts tax. It's like, dude, why do you support that? You have a retail business. Like, you're one of the people worst affected by that. Why in the world would you support that? Like I mean, even if he was acting in his own self-interest, as a lot of politicians do, I'm not saying that that's necessarily what he's doing, but even if he was just trying to help himself, it's like you would think he'd say, "Well, yeah, I'd support a sales tax instead." Like, why are you supporting the tax that hurts both the consumer and you? And I think that part of that's why I got an A rating from the New Mexico Business Coalition, and he didn't.
Oh, nice. We'll have to pull that up. I think a lot of people sometimes even do things against their interests, or they do things because of public choice economics, and it just comes down to there's concentrated benefits and dispersed costs. So you got a special interest group that says, hey, be for this, be for this, be for. We're seeing that. I mean, we see that now. We saw that with the scary beer flu regime. We saw that everything where maybe it hurts most people, but a select few benefit. And those people have the ability, whether it's lobbyists or CEOs or heads of corporations or someone has a lot of power, say, hey, I can help myself and the people around me in my circle. What's going to hurt a lot of people, but I can give this politician more votes. So stuff like that happens. Or it could just be he doesn't know what's going on and just kind of said, yeah, it's great. It's great. But I do find that kind of weird. He's just saying, yeah, taxes are good, or, good. Because aren't Republicans, at least what they say, because it's a mixed bag of Republicans. You have some of the old guard, you have some of the MAGA people, you have liberty Republicans like Rand Paul. So they're not all the same. But I would think if you want to be popular in a red district, you'd be against taxes.
Right. And especially like I could understand a Republican taking a little bit more of a moderate approach like that if they were in a three-way race with themselves, a Democrat, and a Libertarian. But when you're in a situation where you're a Republican only running against a Libertarian, you would think that you would take a little bit harder stance on taxes, especially when your district is overwhelmingly red.
Yeah. Especially the fact that for the longest time in my life, I think that's the second reason I went to the Libertarian Party. First was foreign policy, because I saw the Ron Paul Giuliani debate. And the second was because, hey, it's like, whoa, these people are actually free market. They're the real deal, as opposed to Republicans who will tell me, yes, I'm free market. And that even frustrates me sometimes more than Democrats, where Democrats are like, look, we believe in redistribution of wealth. I'm like, that's a terrible idea. But at least you're being honest, where a lot of Republicans are like, no, I'm free market. Trust me. I believe all the same things you do. Oh, but we do need taxes on this. Oh, but we do need to send, however many, amount of dollars to this country or that country or this, or even something as simple and basic. Oh, we need to give the police more and more and more equipment. So we need to do that. But we're anti-socialist just for the reasons or just for the causes that we like.
Right. It's always a promise of smaller government, and then no smaller government occurs. I mean, I don't like the Democratic politicians by any means, but at least they are honest, like you said. They tell us they're going to kick us in the shins, and they kick us in the shins. So we know what they're going to do.
Yeah, we know what they're going to do. I think the hardest part is getting rid of these rhinos who are like, yeah, hey, America first, all this. And then they spew this rhetoric. And then it's back to the same thing. Okay, we're going to fund this. We're going to take your tax dollars here. And nothing really ever changes. They just go ahead and sometimes they even work with the Democrats, which is crazy to me. So I'm really looking forward to your race, House District 66. Andrew Kennedy, everyone, representing the great state of Mexico. He's going to be an amazing representative. And just to even say, New Mexico is actually one of the first states I started kind of researching, looking up like different politicians because of Gary Johnson. I think from my understanding, he was a reasonable governor because he said no on everything. I think you can do the same thing in the state house.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you for taking the time. I got one last question. Just a fun one. Do real Cowboys come from New Mexico or Texas?
West of the Llano Estacado, which the Llano Estacado comes about 15 miles into New Mexico on the eastern border. The real Cowboys come from west of there. In Texas anymore, that's just drugstore Cowboys. That's just people dressing up and playing cowboy.
Oh man, Oh man, my boy Brandon's not gonna like that because he's a good cowboy. What if there are real ranchers down in Texas though? Can't.
Yeah, there's a few left. They're out in the very western parts of the state, and there's a few of them down around the Rio Grande. But the vast majority of Texas is it. In my opinion, has just turned into an overgrown suburban hellscape, pretty much.
All right, fair enough. Now, as far as I'm concerned, though, I do love Texas. I do like Tennessee. I like Florida from the time I spent down there. So, and New Mexico is definitely an amazing state because we have an awesome representative, Andrew Kennedy, for House District 66. So you're sure real cowboys come from New Mexico, right?
Oh yeah.
Great, great. And just to speak one last point to all of this, when are you planning to, get out all the information and stuff? Like I'm seeing a lot of your stuff. Do you have your website and everything up already, or do you have anything on Twitter or any social media?
I do have a Twitter account up. I'm not a Twitter guy myself, but I have some campaign people that run that. The Facebook page is a mix of myself and my campaign people running that. We don't have a website up. The fastest way to reach me is through the Facebook account, or my public phone number. I mean, it's easily available through the state records, both from last year and from this year from elections. If anybody wants to contact me, you can text me. I mean, you can call me. It's 575-616-5686.
Yeah,
That's the easiest way to get a hold of me. In all honesty, if you want to know something, and which I mean that's something that I
do you want to say or talk about before we end it?
about the only thing I'd add is if anybody in New Mexico just in general is watching, early voting starts on October 11th and election day is November 8th, and I hope that we get a good turnout at the polls.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, if you're tired of Republicans and Democrats, which I know a lot of people are, and if you want actual freedom in New Mexico, which is a great state for that, you saw how effective it was under Gary Johnson, even though he wasn't probably the perfect Republican governor, how effective it can be when people do take pro-liberty stances or at least say no. So that is going to be amplified with Andrew Kennedy right here. He took an hour of his time to talk to me, and I'm extremely grateful, and I'm wishing him the best of luck, and keep going for it, man. Keep running, and I think you'll definitely end up in the state house. Hopefully I can as well in Pennsylvania, and thanks so much for your time. Real cowboys do come from New Mexico.
Appreciate you for having me on.
I appreciate your time. This is Kareem with the Essential Libertarians. I just spent an amazing hour with Andrew Kennedy running for the House District 66 in New Mexico. Go check him out on his Facebook, which will have links down below. And definitely let him know if you have any questions. You can call him on this phone number, and he will answer you directly, not a staffer, and talk to you about the issues you have.
That's certainly not going to be a staffer answering. That's a direct line to my cell phone. So you'll get a hold of me and not a campaign staffer or anybody else.
Yes. So if you want a no BS libertarian, again, one more time, Andrew Kennedy, House 66 District, he will actually pick up his phone and talk to you. Tell me one other politician you can do that with. You can't do that at a federal level, guaranteed. You can't hardly even do that at a state level. But an actual person you can talk to who will solve your issues or at least look into your issues, that's something amazing. That's the power of decentralization and the Libertarian Party. Thank you so much, Andrew. Wish you the best of luck. And this is Kareem with the Essential Libertarians, giving you the tools for self-governance. I will see you in the next video.